But we've been going through the book and the story of Joshua together. There have been a lot of miraculous things that happen. And most of us, when we read those things, we assume that those are going to be experiences we hear about, but we're never really going to understand and see for ourselves. And most of us don't live our days looking for a miracle. We don't expect that to happen. We have a lot of things we'd love to happen. We have things we hope happen, but we don't really expect it. And as we just sang for a few moments, Lord, we want you to move. We want you to do a special thing in our hearts. We've got big things in front of us that we can't handle, and we know what you've done in the past, and we'd love to see you do that now. But most of us don't necessarily expect it to happen. We just read about it and marvel at what took place thousands of years ago. But as we work through that together, we're going to get to what is the biggest of all of the moments, the biggest of all of the miraculous moments that we read throughout the book of Joshua. So if you have your Bible, open it up to the book of Joshua, chapter 10. Joshua is one of the first books in the Old Testament. If you're new to what's going on here, God's people have been enslaved in Egypt for a long time, and God made a promise to their ancestor Abraham that eventually they were going to have their own land. So this is the process of them discovering, overtaking, conquering, and being able to settle in the land that God had for them, the literal land of a promise there, and what we know today as Israel. So they're on their way there. There's been a lot that's gone on. And over the last couple of weeks, we saw the miracle as they crossed the Jordan River and God parted the seas just as he had done for their ancestors as they crossed over the Red Sea. We saw them go to Jericho and God say, this is a different kind of battle. You're going to march, you're going to shout, you're going to blow horns, and the walls are going to come down. They experienced that miracle. They got to a place called Ai. They were a little disappointed when one person's unfaithfulness affected the entire spiritual family. But they regrouped, and with God's favor again on them, they overtook Ai. So they're on the march. And word is starting to get out to the other cities in this place. Cities that don't recognize the God of Israel. They don't even know who the God of Israel is. They don't know his name. They don't understand anything about him. They just know there are people invading their land they believe belongs to them. So they're starting to get worried. And one of those places that was a little worried was the place called Jerusalem. Now we know eventually that was a place where the king was, the king of Israel, but not yet. It was just a place where pagan people lived that did not know the God of Israel. Jerusalem knows that Israel is on the march. This army is coming. So they're trying to get themselves prepared and ready, and they know that ultimately they're going to have to get through the city of Gibeon first before they get to them. So, they've got some time. But then they get word that Gibeon decided not to fight Israel. They went to Israel and said, let's make a peace agreement. Let's just do this thing together. We won't get in your way of your promise of your God, but you won't destroy us either like you did Jericho and like you did at Ai. So they made a peace agreement. And Jerusalem found out that Gibeon now has allied with Israel. So Jerusalem says, we got to figure this thing out. We can't stand against them. And they began to send word for help to a city called Eglon, to a city called Jarmuth, to a city called Lachish, and a city called Hebron. So these 4 other cities and their kings get messages from Jerusalem saying, let's bind together. Let's be the 5 armies together. And you Lord of the Rings Hobbit people, just chill. But the 5 armies together, this came first. They get together. We're going to take out Gibeon. Because if we wait, they're going to be too powerful. So the 5 kings and the 5 armies go to war against Gibeon. The king at Gibeon sends word to Joshua and says, you remember about a week ago when we made this peace agreement? Yeah, well, we need some peace. We need some help. We need you to come help us. So Joshua leads the armies of Israel to Gibeon, and together they fight back, push back, and ultimately destroy the 5 armies and the 5 kings, and they establish themselves there. Now, there's something that happened in that battle that I want to bring out. 2 things, really. One just kind of crazy and cool, and one of them is crazy and it's hard to even comprehend. The crazy cool is the fact that God was fighting for them, and there's a moment in the battle in which there are too many armies that Israel and Gibeon are fighting against. and God chooses to rain down hailstones on them. So hail is being dropped out of heaven, and in that way, God is also fighting for them, which is just kind of wild for Joshua to say, God, we need your help, and he just sends hail. It's hard for a southern boy to say this, right? But sends hail. Hail came down and conquered much of the people, to the point where we even read that the hailstones did more damage than the soldiers actually did. But the second thing is Joshua standing in front of God and making the craziest request that any person has ever made of God. And in Joshua chapter 10, verse 12, we read about this request. It says, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, so people heard him pray this prayer. He said, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jeshar? And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. There was no day like that before it or after it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. They're at Gilgal, they leave, they go to Gibeon, they arrive, and at some point in that battle or pre-battle moment, Joshua prays and says, God, I need you to do something for me. I need you to stop time. Just stop time. Now, I get confused with multiverse, that this is a whole different kind of thing. Stop time. I see the sun, I see the moon. Just, can you make it stop? We need this. And God listened to Joshua. And for the only time in recorded history, God stopped time because one man prayed one prayer, believing that God cared enough to fight for him. Now, we read through this, and it's not just in Joshua. There are other points, and one of those is the book of Jasher. It's a lost book. It hasn't ever been found, but it's quoted 4, maybe 5 times throughout the Old Testament, where people quote this book of poetry. So it was already written by the time that Joshua was recorded. This was already known to the people that there was a moment in which Joshua asked God to stop time, and God did it for him. And the quote here that is so powerful is, there was no day like it before or after in which God listened to the voice of a man. Now, those are the moments when we listen, when we hear that, when we read that, we think, that happens to him, that doesn't happen ever to me. But I don't know that Joshua stood up and said, fellas, check out this prayer. Like, watch this. This is going to work, absolutely. I don't know what was going through his mind. I've asked God for a lot of things in my lifetime. I have never even considered asking God to make time stop. To say, God, I know how things are rolling, but if you could just peel this thing back or just stop it. I need more time here. I need length here. I need to be able to do this. I need you to break the laws of nature that you set in place. And just because I'm asking, one man praying, one faith, it changed the whole world. And as we look through this, it's encouraging, but I think the question then jumps off the page is, why doesn't God stop the sun for me? If one man, Joshua, who wasn't a perfect man, he had a lot of blood on his hands, made a lot of mistakes along the way. If this one man was able to get you to stop time, all I'm asking is for some money. All I'm asking is for some health. All I'm asking for is some friends. All I'm asking for is a good grade. All I'm asking for is an opportunity, an invitation, a promotion. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for the sun to stop. But why doesn't it happen for us? And I'm not trying to make God into a formula where we can put him in a corner and say, God, you have to do this because 1 + 1 is that. Not at all. But I do think we can find some reasons throughout God's story to get some clarity on why maybe God doesn't move in the way that we ask him to move. If God is willing and able to listen to one man's prayer and stop time, why would he not just do this small thing that I ask him? And I think the reasons perhaps fall in one of three categories. Either it's benefit, belief, or big picture. And I want us to look at each of those. Again, this is not a formula. This is not God always has to do this. That's a very dangerous place to be. And I don't want to ever pretend to say, I figured this thing out. Let me share this with you. That's not where I am. But I do believe throughout God's story, there is a reason why at times God doesn't stop the sun for us. And I want us to take a look at this. At first is the area of benefit. And what I mean by benefit is when my miracle motive is impress me or bless me, the sun will, and you could even put in parentheses, most likely, but the sun will not stop. When the reason I want God to do this thing is because I want him to impress me or bless me, and it's all about me, it's all about my experience, it's all about what I'm seeing and what I'm going through, then I don't know that we can expect God in those moments to stop time for us, to make the sun stop where it is just for us. Because most of the time when God moves, it's always to ultimately affect someone else, some other people, another event. There's always more than just, you're just so sweet and you prayed so nicely. I'll give you this thing. Now, I'm not saying God won't. I do think there are times in Scripture where God just seems to have a heart of mercy that is so overwhelming that he blesses people just to bless them. But they're few and far between, those moments are. Most of the time, it's a bigger benefit. If God's going to move mountains, if God's going to part the waters, if God's going to stop the sun in the sky from right where it is and leave it there for 24 hours, then there's usually a benefit beyond, didn't you think that was cool? What do you think? Wasn't that something big to be? He's not there to just impress us. And I think we have a little bit of understanding here in Joshua chapter 4, when the people crossed over to the Jordan on dry land and God parted that for them. And we say, why did God lead the people across the Jordan that way? You could always say to get to the other side. That's probably not the actual answer. He led them across the Jordan for something completely different. And when they got to the other side, listen to Joshua's perspective in chapter 4, verse 24. Joshua said, he did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. He didn't say, well, God did this because he didn't want us to get wet, or he wanted to make sure we got over in a timely manner, or we got over. He said, God did this way so that the world would know his power and that his own people would fear him the way they should. And I shared with you at another time months ago that this has become a part of my prayer to the point where now I find myself saying it without even stopping to think. Anytime I'm about to ask God for something, especially if it's bigger than anything I could handle on my own, miracle type stuff, I always begin by saying, God, so that the world around me will know your power, and so that I will fear you the way I should, I ask that you, and then I make my request. And oftentimes that weeds out a lot of stuff, a lot of unimportant things. Think about some of those small things that aren't that big a deal that you ask God for. If you just started with, so that the world will know your power and so that I will fear you as I should, would you please let me make a B+ or better on the, okay. It's like, are we really doing that? Like, is that big of a moment for us? And maybe it is, but it has filtered out a lot of stuff. Or I'm spending more time asking for suns to stop in the sky than I am for small little moments along the way. Help traffic not to be bad on I-24 on my way home. Like all the little things along the way that I get so accustomed to praying. Like, what does it matter? There are bigger things, and there are bigger needs, and there are bigger hurts, and there are more hopes that are necessary. But who is it going to benefit? If it's just going to benefit me, I don't know that I can expect God to actually move in that way. Joshua got that. So if God is not answering my prayer the way I'm asking, if God is not stopping the sun for me, there's a possibility that I'm just asking because I want it. I want the promotion. I want the money, or I want the opportunity. I want the invitation. I want the comfort. I want the ease. I want a good night's sleep, whatever it might be. All those are fine. But if they just benefit me, I think there's a little bit of clarity on perhaps why God's not rushing to do that for me. The second thing is in the area of belief. We just simply don't believe that God can or will. And when we don't believe God can or believe God will, the sun, most of the time, will not stop. If we don't have that sense of, I know my God, I know he can, I know my God, I believe he will, and I'm trusting in this. And this is not about, I think the old phrase people used to use, name it and claim it, or that it's not that. It's not me saying, God, you have to do this because of this. It's just me saying, God, I know, I'm confident of this. Just as Joshua was so confident, he stood in front of the people. Imagine if that prayer doesn't go down that way. He stands up and says, God, please stop the sun in the sky. And nothing happens. I mean, if I'm a soldier in the army, I'm thinking, what kind of request is that? Stop the sun. Like you're our leader. Come up with something better than that God will actually, oh, never mind. Sun stopped. Like, that was bold. That was so confident and so courageous of him in that moment to believe enough to pray and to ask that. And in James chapter 1, thousands of years after this, a follower of Jesus wrote, but when you ask, and he was specifically talking about wisdom, but I think the purpose is even bigger. He says, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. He said, when you ask, there needs to be a conviction and a real source of confidence that God can and God will do this. He says, if you don't have that, then don't expect him to do anything. Don't expect him to actually move in that way, because you're double-minded, you're waffling, you're wishy-washy, you're back and forth. And so often we're afraid to put all of our trust in because we don't want to be let down. We don't want to be hurt. We've been let down by people so much that we've trusted. We don't know how to relate to God other than in a similar way than we've related to each other. And we don't want to be let down by God. That disappointment may last even longer. So I'll just throw it up. God, if you're not too busy, if it's not too big of a deal, if you don't mind, then this is what I want. And there's very little confidence and conviction. And you don't find confidence and conviction away. You find that as you walk with him, as you get closer, as you're willing to put all of yourself in. Last night I sat with my family. We were watching the UT game together, and the points just kind of stalled there for a moment, where we were hoping for 40 points and they weren't scoring 40 points, and the other team scored, and immediately my little college buddies, everybody starts texting, here we go again, all those, like, I don't want to hear it. I do not want to hear it. What it was I'm afraid to believe that this might go well, so I'm just going to get real cynical and real sarcastic and act like it's not a big deal, or look at them. I'm afraid to believe, and I'm afraid to hope. And I wonder if there are some things that I've missed out on and my family's missed out on, and maybe even my church family have missed out on, because I've been afraid to trust and believe that God can and will do it. I don't want to be let down. I don't want to feel foolish. I don't want to look foolish, so I'm not even going to go there. And yet God has said, I would have done it, but you didn't believe. You didn't trust. So I didn't provide that for you. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 58, we've got this moment in which Jesus left a town because of their lack of faith. And it says, he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. It almost sounds like he would have done more had they believed, but they did not believe and they missed out. So belief is an issue at times, and why maybe we don't see God do what we're asking him to do. And then the third thing is just big picture. There's something more going on. Every time we make a request, there's always an effect that goes on. I'm asking for one thing, it's going to affect someone else. I say, God, would you give me this job? Then that means the other person who's applying for the job doesn't get a job. That's just the way the whole prayer thing works out. God, help my player to make this kick. Well, that means that on the other side, you're kind of praying that someone else loses, or God, give me this opportunity. Well, that means we walk through the door and we're no longer where we were before, and maybe there was a need here. So what I mean by the big picture is when my request prevents God's story, the sun most likely will not stop. When what I'm asking for interferes with what God is overall doing. And there are times we ask for things and we feel like, well, what would it hurt? But actually, it would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. There was a moment in which Paul, who wrote most of the part of the New Testament, he wrote most of those letters. He said, God, I've got this issue. He called it a thorn in his flesh. He said, I've got this issue. Would you please just take it away? After all I've done, I've almost lost my life over and over for you. I've given up everything to follow you. I'm making more of a difference than anyone ever has or will inside the church. And I'm just asking that you take away this problem. And God said over and over, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want you to become conceited. I don't want you to miss out on this. This is the thing that keeps you bound to me. This is the thing that keeps you relying on me. This is the thing that causes you to walk by faith. And that's what I want from you. So I am going to be enough to get you through it. My grace, the quote is, my grace will be sufficient for you. My grace is enough. I'm not going to fix this for you. I'm not going to heal you in this way. I'm not going to take this problem from your life. There would have been an effect on Paul. And there are times when we ask for things that it would be a hindrance if we took them off. And maybe it would be harmful if God removed us from the situation or removed the problem. Or maybe we just couldn't handle it. Some of us are asking for blessings that we cannot handle. God knows that we're already a train wreck. And if he chooses to bless us with a lot more money, it's not going to get better. He's looking at us saying, you're asking for opportunities, you're asking for invitations, but what are you doing with the opportunities and invitations I'm giving you now? You're asking for promotion, you're asking for more, but look at what you've done with this. You're not ready for this. You're not mature enough. You can't handle this. You're going to hurt other people if you have this power or this money or this moment, whatever it might be. There are times when God is actually protecting the overall story and direction of what he's doing by choosing to not do that. And it's not just a negative thing. Sometimes the bigger picture is a positive thing. One example that I want to share with you is from Jesus' prayer. The night that he was arrested and taken away, and this is familiar to 90% of you who are followers of Jesus. He was praying to God, Son praying to the Father, the night he was going to be arrested. And he said this to God in Matthew chapter 26, verse 39, to the Father. Jesus fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. Verse 42, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. If the Father had answered the Son's prayer the way he prayed it, there's no salvation because there was no other way. If the Father looked at the Son and said, it's breaking my heart to see you struggle this way, so I'm taking this off. We're not doing this. I'm not going to allow you to be sacrificed. Then there is no forgiveness for any of us, and we're all doomed to hell, every single one of us. Jesus went through that because there was a much bigger, better story that was unfolding. And if what we're asking for is going to ultimately stand in the way of God finishing the story, then he is not going to say yes. And it's not always a malicious, God, I don't care about the story, do this for me. It's just us not understanding and seeing the bigger picture. It's us not being able to see actually what's going on. So if I have believed, if I have secure confidence that God can and will, and if I am pretty certain that this is not just about me, this is for the betterment of everyone else, and God still doesn't, then I have to trust in that moment that God has something bigger and better planned. And I can rest in that. What I can't rest in is thinking that maybe God didn't move because I didn't believe. Or maybe God didn't move because I didn't ask. Maybe God didn't move because I was too selfish. That I can't handle that. But if I know that I have done everything God's way and he still says no, then I know he just got something better, and I'll sit back and I'll wait for it to unfold. So instead of allowing those disappointing moments to drive a wedge between God and me, which is what a lot of us have done at times, I'm just trusting in those moments that those disappointments are actually going to open up to the bigger picture. And I know in my own life through the years, especially the not so good times, especially the moments that God did not answer my prayers, I know that through those years, God has finally gotten me to a place where I'm not following him because of what he's going to do for me. I'm not following him because of what I need. I'm following him because of who he is. And if you can get to a place where your allegiance to God has nothing to do with what he can do for you, but everything to do with who he is, there is so much freedom in that. And there is so much joy in that. And I am this close at moments to standing in front of you and asking God to stop the sun, because I believe he might actually do that. I'm just going to hold off because I don't know other than it's cool why I would ask for that. But I'm this close because I know he can. I know it. And I know that he might even do it for me, not because I deserve it, but simply because God is in control and he is willing to listen to his people and willing to move. So what that means, I believe, for all of us, is that every single thing that we've given up on and said, well, that'll never happen. That'll never come back together. She and I will never have a relationship that we once had again. My kids will never see me the same again. I'll never be able to have a relationship with my dad again. Whatever the thing is, all of that's back on the table. Because if God can speak creation into existence, if God can raise the dead, and if God can listen to one soldier who stands at the edge of his people and says, God, would you please stop the sun in the sky? Leave it right where it is. If God will do that, then everything is possible. Everything. It's just up to us to be willing to trust him and to believe. Now, as we get to the end, I want to mess everything up, as I often do. When I read through this story, as I always really have, I've gotten to the part where the sun is still. And I have envisioned Joshua fighting all day. And he's not done taking names, so he needs a little more time. And he says, God, I don't want them to go home and regroup at nighttime, so just keep the sun where it is, beating down on us as we beat down on them. And for another 24 hours, there was just this warfare in the sunshine. That's what I have always pictured in my own mind. But if you go back to chapter 10, and we won't read through the verses again, but in verse 9, it says Joshua got the request, and he led his armies, and they marched all night from Gilgal to Gibeon. And if you look at the distance between Gilgal and Gibeon, it would take roughly 7 hours, between 6 and 8 hours, to march that. So they marched all night long, and when they arrived at Gibeon to help Gibeon, the sun was just coming up. You still see the moon. You see the sun starting to come up. And instead, maybe, of Joshua saying, this noonday sun, leave it there. What if Joshua was saying, God, the element of surprise is what's helping us here. And if you'll be our light, we can fight in the dark. So hold that sun right there. Don't let it come up. Hold that moon right there in the valley. And if you got any hailstorms available, like we're ready to kind of do this thing. And they fought in the dawn. They fought in the spooky, foggy morning for the next 24 hours because you've got 5 kings and 5 armies going, what in the hailstorms is going on? Like, what are we doing right here? It's dropping all over us and we're getting beat up and it's dawn and army. Where did they come from? And there's just a lot happening on there. And they are just wearing out those armies. And that sun is just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting for 24 hours to rise up. Now, does it matter? No, it doesn't. It's kind of fun to think about. But what it does tell me is that there will be moments in my life where I feel like I need to be able to see every direction, every possible outcome, every possible enemy, every possible problem here before I can move forward. And God may say, I tell you what, why don't you Step that dream out in the dark and let me be your light. And I'm reminded at the very end in Revelation chapter 21 and 22, it says, when we get into the presence of God, there will be no more need for a moon. There will be no more need for a sun, for the Lamb himself will be our light. And when we get to those moments where we're walking into the great, great uncertainty, whatever it may be for us, maybe we need to stop and say, God, I tell you what, I like it like this. I don't need to see anything else. I'm going to hold your hand and let you guide me. You will be my light. God can and will. And there's a chance that your miracle moment is only being held back because you don't believe, because you haven't asked, or maybe even because you haven't been willing to step out now without all the answers. Remember in the Jordan, the preacher had to stick his foot in the water before they parted. At Jericho, they had to march around for 6 days before the seventh day when the walls came down. There is some action that has to take place, and sometimes we even have to step out in the dark and allow the Lord to be our light.